thought I'd do a video on my experience with colorism and why I feel it triggers people the most. You see, for me personally, I feel like often with colorism, people seem to um, have this idea of dark skin and light skin black people having a dichotomy in experiences, right? And then they basically have that dark skin black people, black women are seen as aggressive, as masculine, as unattractive, as unwanted, based off of their skin tone, and they have this perspective that light skin is wanted. And then the thing is, they always say that they're put forward, that they are seen as better, as they are seen as more of the ideal to the standard. The thing is with this is that often I've seen it where when it comes to the brown skin side of it, people expect the brown skinned people to be more ignored or not seen as bad or good, really. And then there's people who are more so like not brown skinned, not light skinned, not dark skinned. And in different avenues, like there's dark brown and there's light brown. There's dark brown skinned people who I have always thought were dark skinned, but for example, my mother had an experience as a dark-skinned woman, but she fell under the dark brown category. And she always said how colorism didn't exist because she never experienced any negativity for her complexion. And one could say that has to do with several reasons. One particularly had to do with the fact that she didn't prefer darker skinned men, but more than that, I think it has to do with the fact that she was not considered completely dark skinned. This is a main reason why my perspective on colorism is not really, I don't relate to the idea that colorism exists, but I don't hold the idea that just because I think that colorism doesn't exist, that I think negatively of dark-skinned black people. A lot of the time with different channels and different content, they have this idea that dark-skinned black people are bad, especially dark-skinned black women. And that's why they deny colorism, almost in a way to hurt dark-skinned black women. Personally, for me, that's not my reason. For me, it's like, I just have always thought dark-skinned black women were ideal. Being someone who's in between and not light or dark, I've always chosen dark skin. I've always chosen to look more dark skinned than light skinned. That's just always been my preference. And the reason why is because what I've seen as more beautiful as dark skinned black women. You have to think, and you grow up around white people, and people always say white people prefer lighter skin. They prefer lighter skin on them, not particularly on black people. Most of the time, I think they don't even notice a difference with light or dark. But back white, like growing up with white people, mostly, and not really growing up in a black community, I always experience, if there was a black person around, you would get confused for them. It wouldn't matter if they were light skinned, light brown skinned, dark-skinned, brown-skinned, didn't matter. They're always going to be confused for them because they're black and they don't differentiate like that. So anyway, the way I grew up was kind of like my mother was praised for how beautiful she was by all races too. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, mainly white people because that's what I mainly grew up with. I literally was told by a white person actually. If I was as dark as her, I would have been as pretty as her. Um, so to me, like, I guess that's why from my perspective it's always been where I felt kind of like I've always wanted to be darker over lighter. Um, I kind of think a lot of people don't um, really think about the reality of colorism. Like, for example, like I said in my other video, often it seems like people will say colorism doesn't exist and then prove the other people are right by acting negative towards the dark-skinned people and basically imply that it does exist. From my perspective, it's always like, I don't think that colorism exists when it comes to the general population and where it counts. Now, a dark-skinned black man who hates himself, sure, it does exist, but he's really just self-hating. He's not really, you know, colorist in my opinion, because he's colorist to himself as well. Also, one other thing, it's like, from my perspective, it's like, a lot of the time, the people who try to act like colorism doesn't exist, but then at the same time trying to pump themselves up, are usually of a lower self-esteem, I think. Because this is why they end up using dark-skinned black men's validation to feel better, because they don't feel better, and, white people and other races who may even be darker than them, make them feel less than, you know. Because honestly, someone who's Mexican and dark skin can make you have, like, they can be more hateful towards you even though they're darker. Because I've said this before, skin tone never had to do with racism with blackness. Blackness had to do with Africa. Blackness had to do with our history. Blackness had to do with slavery. Blackness had to do with the civil rights movement. It had nothing to do with skin tone. It has to do with, if anything, more features. Because that's what signifies us. That's what has kept us subjugated in the past, and that's what the connotation with being black is. Native Americans are darker skinned. Indians are, you know, darker skinned. Asian people are darker skinned, but they don't get the connotation that black people get for being black. So that's why, to me, colorism doesn't exist as far as society, because you can see that if it did exist, then lighter skinned black people would be treated better than Indian people. You think that ever happens? Yeah, we all know that doesn't. So that's why, to me, that's why colorism doesn't exist. Many of the time I feel like darker skinned people will internalize their own issue with being dark skinned and then say everything that happened to them that was racist specifically had to do with being dark skinned when it didn't, because if they were light skinned, they would still get that type of treatment because they're identifiably black to other races. So that's basically all I had to say on that. I feel like people don't really, I feel like people on both sides have like a negative view of dark skin, and then they come up with reasons for why they have their perception. Like, I think on one side, when you feel negatively towards darker skinned people, if you think colorism actually exists, would it really be wrong? If you think negatively. No, it wouldn't be. And, the other way, I feel like, of course, you would think everything has to do with color of your skin when you think so negatively of your skin tone. If you think that being dark is a disability, then of course you're going to think everything has to do with your skin tone, even though it may not. Even the things that have to do with racism then become about your skin tone when nobody even said anything about your skin tone. People who are being racist to you may not have even known you were any different complexion than a light skinned person. So that's all I have to say on that. I'm going to end this video. I have one more video to do, so stay tuned. Bye.